at the end of the day, I think what would be important for those that are listening that have never considered anything is there something that you're passionate about that you would want to make a difference in?
Welcome to Leaders of the West, a podcast for innovators and changemakers. I'm your host, Jessie Jarvis, the founder of the West, and I'm sitting down with agriculturalists, entrepreneurs, executives, and everyone in between with the goal of digging into the strategies, mindsets, and lessons that have been crucial to the success of ag and Western. Whether you're carrying on the next generation of your family's operation, starting something from scratch, or determined to climb up the leadership ladder, we're going to inspire you to continue to dream big, growing not just you, but the future of agriculture and Western as a whole. Let's go. It's the first 2 weeks of a brand new quarter, which can only mean one thing. Be a Maker School is open for enrollment. So what exactly is Be a Maker School? It's an online course platform specifically for Western trades. You can learn from home and at your own pace and join a community of makers and entrepreneurs who can support you as you build skills and confidence in your newfound hobby or career. Be a Maker School offers courses in equine photography, cinch making, rawhide and leather braiding, silversmithing and engraving, leatherwork and tooling, and then there's also a business course called The Business of Making, where I am one of the instructors. That course specifically details all of the business aspects behind being a maker. Different sales channels, shipping, marketing, website, branding, email correspondence, goal setting, and a number of other topics. As I mentioned earlier, Be a Maker School is only open for enrollment for the first 2 weeks of every quarter. So if you're interested now, it's definitely worth checking out. Otherwise, you have to wait another 3 months. You can grab all of the info at beamaker.school. Again, that website is beamaker.school. I can't wait to hear how you have inspired and fostered the maker that is inside of you. Welcome to today's episode of Leaders of the West. Once again, we have a really great guest. Today, we are sitting down with Mark Stewart. He is the president and CEO of Agriculture Future of America, also known as AFA. This is not to be confused with FFA. So basically, Agriculture Future of America is an organization that really focuses on developing leaders specific to agriculture and natural resources. So they work with college kids through a variety of events throughout the year to really build and foster leaders and engagement and innovation. And it is absolutely the best leadership development organization for student leaders in agriculture and food and natural resources. So Mark himself, he lives in Kansas City, Missouri. Mark is a graduate of Northwest Missouri State University. He has a master's degree in business administration, and then he also earned his doctorate in educational leadership and policy analysis from the University of Missouri. With those degrees, throughout his career, he has worked in communications, development, fundraising for a number of different groups. And now for AFA, he's been there since 2011, so for 14 years now. And I really think you guys are going to love the conversation that we had, especially because we focused this conversation specifically on board of directors and how we, as listeners, serve on those boards of directors, or if you are somebody who is an executive or a staff member of an organization or an association that is led by a board of directors. If you are a member of an organization or an association and you are represented by a board of trustees or a board of directors, because as we know, boards are absolutely vital to the future of our industries, but not necessarily just our own industries, but to America as a whole. I think of our rural communities and school boards and library boards and rec district boards and fair boards. Basically anything that touches our community likely has a board behind it. And those boards serve absolutely vital purposes, and it is up to us to usually serve in a role that helps continue to drive the mission of that organization through our service as a board of trustee or as a director on that board. And I know that many of us will be approached in our lifetime hey, I would love if you would consider being a member of the board or serving on the board. And for those of you who have maybe never done that, but you've been approached to do so, you've probably kind of wondered, okay, well, what exactly would that look like? Or what would that entail? How do I know that I'm a great fit? So we really go through all of those points in this conversation. It was a joy to sit down with Mark. And so I really hope you guys love this episode as much as I did. I'm going to stop talking so that you guys can just start listening to Mark. But here we go. This is Mark Stewart, the president and CEO of Agriculture Future of America. Mark, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. I'm really excited about this conversation because I think that it is so crucial to a lot of our listeners and then also really to the future of our industries, just knowing how many boards and industry associations and organizations there are. But before we get into all of that, can you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what led to you being at Agriculture Future of America?
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Jesse. Yeah, so my background is kind of ironic. I, studied a certain major in school and thought that that's what I was going to do, and then stumbled into advancement in higher education, which is really random because back then not a lot of people studied fundraising and alumni engagement. But that's actually something I really enjoyed. So kind of worked my way up into working in higher education, fundraising. And then my career spanned public university, private university, a little bit of fundraising consulting. I've worked in social service realm for a little bit, again, also in a fundraising and communication role. And then kind of stumbled into this. I thought I actually was headed back to higher education and was interviewing for a job. And someone in my network that was at my church and knew my profession knew that someone was trying to hire this role at AFA, and she was bugging me about it. So I said, I'm happy to connect with them. The job in higher ed didn't work out. And about a week later, I was offered the job at AFA. So it was really one of many examples I could share about how your network is a personal asset to you, as valuable as, any asset that has monetary value, because it led me to this role. Maybe if you'll oblige me, just a high level about AFA and why that background is important to why I enjoy what I do. So we're an organization that is not member-based or club structure-based. We predominantly serve college students, undergraduate college students all across the country, and do some work with professionals, but it's all about competency development. You might consider them soft skills. We enhance the network of young people, back to what I just shared, which is your network is a personal asset. And we help with career pathway and career exploration in new and different ways. We're just a really good convener and selector of top talent to sharpen their skills, their competencies, get better networked in the hopes that they solve industry problems down the road and strengthen our industry as a result of the training and development that we provide. All that to be said, what I think is unique about my background, what led me to AFA and why I'm so passionate about it is, we're a really interesting blend between higher education and the more meaningful nonprofit sector where you see the difference that you make with those that you serve. So it's a nice hybrid without any of the bureaucracy of higher education. So we get to be able to do whatever we want to do and serve however we want to serve. And so there's beauty in that and probably what I've enjoyed the most. I will confess I'm a generation removed. So I'm a typical, grew up in a city. My parents had a small farming operation, but before I ever remember it, which is becoming more and more common. And so I do have a little imposter syndrome from day to day, but married a farm girl from Nebraska, which was part of my exposure to the ag industry. And so just reflecting on it now, I love the blend between higher education and meaningful work. It's hard to imagine finding anything more meaningful than working in this industry. And so I really enjoy getting to try to prop up the young people that we serve so that they can strengthen this industry and take us to the next level.
Well, I can attest to that fact because I have talked to a number of employers who use Of the West, and we've talked about different career fairs and events that they attend. And they have told me, because they go to a number of college career fairs, and then they go to your events as well. And they say that the students at your events are levels above just the general generic college career fair. So I can attest to that fact that speaking from employers, you guys obviously put in a lot of work and reap a great product through those students.
Well, we appreciate hearing that. Always, because it's competitive, students have to compete to get selected to go through our experiences. We're preparing them for real life. So when you want a job, when you want to apply for a board, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, et cetera, you have to compete for the things that you want and that are valuable to you. And so we've been really able to do that, to diversify and and be more inclusive in our environments without feeling exclusive, which is, we don't want to feel like an Ivy League, nothing against the Ivy Leagues, but that we're turning away, so many people. So we found that balance, being able to pull in all sorts of students from all sorts of backgrounds. The kicker is they have a level of ambition because they've had to go through a process. That's why you get the feedback that you get. These students want to be here. They want to develop themselves. They want to develop their network. That's pretty powerful. We're just helping them do it through the experiences that we provide.
Well, and you are a perfect person to talk about the conversation that we're going to have today, because a lot of the work that you do, as you mentioned, is preparing students for the real world, whether that is careers, to serve on boards, how to be generally strong leaders. And I have been wanting to have this conversation with somebody for a while, and our mutual connection, Chandler Mulvaney, was actually who had recommended you for this conversation when I was asking him of who do you think would be a good person to have this conversation with. You were instantly the person who came to mind for him. And that is just about, one, how boards operate, who they serve, how they serve, their different roles. And then, as many of us will likely be asked at some point in our career, whether it is now or years down the road, to serve on a board. And again, maybe that's an industry board. Maybe that is a member, driven organization. Maybe it's something like the local library board or the school board or the rec district, whatever it is. If you are going to do something, you need to go all in, and you also want to make sure that it's the most of your time. So I think that it's really important to prepare ourselves for those opportunities, because again, if we are not prepared to serve, our industries are not going to continue to strengthen themselves and to grow themselves at the rate that we need them to in order to meet the various demands that our industry is faced with. So all of that to say, let's kick this side of the conversation off with what really sparked your passion for leadership with different organizations and associations. Because AFA, you guys have a board of directors also. It kind of sounds like, again, in your past career experiences, many of the things that you have done have all kind of served around organizations and groups that have been led by boards of directors. What have you seen from those experiences, and how are you able to share that with the students you guys work with?
Well, that's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about the last part of it. I don't know that we talk about it as much with students that we serve today. I mean, we generally instill a notion of certain servant leadership with the young people we serve. That's the beauty of kind of how we were founded and what we're after. It doesn't necessarily show up in a conversation around how to serve your community through boards and otherwise. So that's actually interesting. I may have to take that back and ponder that with our team. But interestingly, about my perspective, I mentioned starting in higher education. I mentioned I've worked for both public and private institutions. I worked for a social service organization. I worked for a consultancy. And here I am working for a national not-for-profit organization again. So a mix of national, local, for-profit, not-for-profit, all have some form of governance. And so what's really interesting, if you just kind of pull back and if you don't have that perspective, look at it from a higher level, there's a few things that stand out. In the higher ed space, in some cases you have overall governance of the institution. Think of it like a board of trustees that are in some cases appointed positions, especially if it's a public institution. And then you might have the other side of the house, which is, there's a philanthropic endeavor, a foundation of sorts, and they may have their own board of directors or trustees that oversee the philanthropic efforts of the institution. And then you may even have another governance structure for things like the alumni association of an institution. So that's kind of a smorgasbord of opportunities within the higher ed space. Some appointed, some nominated and elected, a variety of different ways in that world. When you get to the more local level, whether it's, social service agencies, your more kind of grassroots not-for-profits, generally there is a board nomination and selection process, and they're just dying to try to get great potential directors that will move the needle for the mission of that organization. Usually it's a lot more arm twisting than it is people flocking to those types of organizations. And that's the downside of these social service organizations, is there's just not as good a governance as you would like, unless you have a really strong executive director and leadership team. And unfortunately, because those jobs don't pay super well and they're not as, high profile, that's not always the case. And then you've got organizations that are kind of hybrid like ours. You've got some that are in the association space. So, the You could be a federal or government entity that has either an appointed or an elected officer position, or again, could be nomination and selection. At the end of the day, I think what would be important for those that are listening that have never considered anything is there something that you're passionate about that you would want to make a difference in? Let me back up a step and say, don't get involved in board leadership just because you want to solve a problem or you're taking an issue to the organization. That's never the most authentic way to step into it. You want to buy into the mission of what the governance is actually there to oversee and the mission of whatever it is it's meant to deliver on. And so that being said, pull back, find where your passions are, what you think you can make a difference in, maybe what your expertise could lend itself to improve. And then consider what organizations are out there that either at the local or national level, might speak to that, and figure out what the process is. Again, in many cases, it may just be who people that serve on the board that can lift your name up and put your name forward for candidacy. Sometimes that's all it is. And again, all the way back to your network as a personal asset. Sometimes it's really as simple as that. And then there are obviously much more significant positions that at the national level, whether it's corporations or whatnot, they're in some cases paid positions, also leverage a heavy network and your background and experience to be selected or identified for those positions. So there's a variety of different entities that you could pursue. But I guess my advice would be, especially if you've not served before, stick with something small that fits your passion and kind of get your feet wet. And real quickly, you'll learn what you like and what you don't like about board service and the types of organizations. And I would even go so far as to say the level of sophistication of the entity with which you're serving. And you just don't know those things until you kind of get into it and figure out how the organization's led and what you like and what you don't like. That way, when you're considering the next step, you know what you're looking for and you know what kind of leadership you're expecting. You know what the time commitment will look like, et cetera. So that was kind of all over the board, but there's just so many different structures to governance. The final thing that I would add, just from my perspective, I'd maybe caution you to be very careful if you're considering service either for the first time or for a new organization, is be very critical about the level of commitment that you're going to be taking on. And I say that to say I've worked with boards across the spectrum, very involved in the day-to-day, all the way to not very involved in the day-to-day, but ultimately accountable to the oversight of the organization and the executive leadership, but don't really know the inner workings. There is a very broad spectrum of involvement that boards have from even just my limited personal experience. And you need to make sure you're careful about what it is that you're in for, because you can get quickly overwhelmed with the amount of what's asked of you. And it can be very superficial stuff, like how frequently do they meet? If they're meeting monthly, that's a pretty significant time commitment. How many committees are they going to have you to serve on? Because that's outside of the board meetings, and what's going to be the expectation there. So you just need to give some real critical thought to how does the organization run? How much involvement is going to be expected of you? And get as precise a response to those questions as you can, so you have a full perspective before you step into serving. Because I've seen it way too many times, especially with boards that are more involved than less, is burnout. And it happens and it's real. And so just that would be my word of caution, especially if you're considering new service or considering a new organization to serve on.
Well, and especially on the burnout side of things, I think in rural areas where there are fewer people to select from, or even a state organization where the only people who can serve in that role are people from your state. Obviously, on a national level, it's a little bit different because there is a far wider net to select from. But we've all seen people, especially in our rural areas, right? Whether it's the fair board or, like I said, the school board, where that burnout can be real because there's only so many people who are available for the role. But on that note, what are some of the qualities that you see as making somebody a really valuable board member?
Probably one of the biggest things is, how critical a thinker are they? How objective will they be? So again, coming back to, I wouldn't want a board member to come on to my board just because they want to hire as much talent as they can and they don't really care about the mission of what we're ultimately after. So as somebody that's in the executive role and is somewhat involved in the nomination and selection process, those would be some things that we consider. Beyond that, every organization is different, but I can inside the head of how we operate anyways is what are the capabilities and characteristics that we're looking for. So as an example, we primarily serve a younger population, students and earlier working professionals. And so we pay attention to the demographics of that population. What does college enrollment look like? How can our board mirror what the student population and demographics look like? We think about what skills and expertise we have on the board. So, I don't have all human resource professionals on our board. We want people that are involved in business leadership. We need people with financial acumen to oversee our audit and our budget and our investments with us. So thinking about characteristics of what the board needs. And again, some organizations are really good about that. Some aren't. In some cases, it may just be they need, a professional who, fits this very specific profile. They're a producer and they fit this geography profile, and that's all they're really looking for to check the box. In some cases, that may be all they're able to get. And that's the unfortunate part of this. There's a lot of really great public and not-for-profit service opportunities. And the old adage, busy people tend to be asked to serve for these types of things because they see, the capability and that sort of thing. The challenge is getting the best candidates to serve in volunteer or leadership roles on boards because they're probably asked to serve in a lot of different ways. And that tends to be what some of the most successful volunteers are asked to do and why they probably are more critical about the opportunities. So all that to say, again, the characteristics depend on the organization. In some cases, they maybe check the box, in other cases, the organization may be really critical about what they're looking for. But to any extent, there's just a lot of really great and capable people out there that aren't serving because life is busy. They're being pulled in a lot of different ways. I guess the challenge that I would make to anybody listening that's not doing any service and doesn't want to, I would ask you, are you getting enough fulfillment in the things that are filling your time right now? Because some of these things can be really fulfilling to see, a difference that you're making, to be engaged in a really meaningful conversation at a local, regional, national level around something that you're really passionate about, but you'll never have that fulfillment if you don't go serve in that way. So it can be really gratifying, but it can also come with some headaches too. And I think that's where people tend to throw up their hands and not try it. They just worried about the time commitment and the frustrations that may come with it, and not paying enough attention to the fulfillment that may come from serving as well.
Oh, absolutely. I would say, or I would encourage those listening, if you've never served on a board and you maybe have negative thoughts about doing so because of what you've heard from other people and the time commitment that it takes or whatever that is, go serve and then figure out for yourself, is it something that, okay, like this is way too much time in my life. I don't have anything that I can take out of my life to make more time for this, or wow, that was absolutely amazing. I'm so thankful that I didn't just let other people's opinions or what they've projected about doing so change my mind.
Yeah. And just a few additional thoughts to what you said. Again, you have to try to evaluate something that you're closely, connected to or passionate about, right? You can't just pick something off the wall or else it's not going to be as intriguing to you. The other things that, make sure none of these things, generally speaking, are things that you can never get out of, right? And so don't feel like if you're signing on to something, you're signing on and you can never get out of it. Now, I'll say that on the flip side, as somebody that's in the executive role, I don't love a lot of turnover in my leadership. I like to have some continuity and some institutional knowledge. But that being said, this is not an employment engagement and it's something that you can never get out of, right? If it's just not a right fit or time commitments get to be too much, there's always a way out. But I would always encourage, do more due diligence on the front end to know exactly what you're getting into. And so that when you say you're committed, you actually are committed to the term that you sign up for, and then at least see that out. That's always my preference. But again, you're not signing on for life in any of these roles.
Yes, no, I would agree. When I worked at Idaho Cattle Association, we had a board of directors, and I remember that there was a specific board member who was elected and never showed up to a meeting for their entire term. So please don't be that person. We want you to say yes and then actually be committed. Nobody wants the guy who never shows up. So don't be that person. But as somebody who, for those who are, again, considering this, or they are part of an organization that's led by a board of directors, I, in my personal opinion, feel like a board usually serves three purposes. They provide leadership and strategic direction. They support the organization's executive team. And then they also represent the interests of the members or the people who have maybe elected them to be in that position, or however they got to that position. They're usually representing constituents of some kind. That's a very large responsibility. And those elements can honestly often kind of oppose one another. So from your perspective, what is the primary role of a board in an organization?
Well, I'll always start with the really kind of the first one that you alluded to, which is strategic direction. But I'll take it a step further, is to ensure the fulfillment of the mission of whatever that entity is. Most of mine have been in the more not-for-profit, not the public service kind of realm. But regardless, there is an ultimate purpose and directive of the entity. And the primary purpose of the board is to ensure that that organization is doing what it was chartered to do. So there's certainly a strategic element of that, but there's also just a very basic, is this mission creep? Is what we're talking about or what we're pursuing a departure from why we even exist? And so in its most basic form, when I talked about critical thinking and understanding the mission of the organization, I mean, I think that that's where it starts and ends. Now, obviously beyond that, there is a level of support to the staff or the executive leadership. In many cases, that's, the executive is accountable to the board of directors, right? So in a human resources hierarchy, that generally is how it works, although that's not always the case. But in the realms that I've lived and worked, that's often one of the more significant purposes, is to make sure that there is accountability to the executive and ultimately the team that serves that entity and that mission. You mentioned the interest of those that it's serving. I kind of tie that back to the missional aspect. However, I'll take a little different twist to it because I'll use the example at AFA. We have many national, multinational industry companies that are represented on our board. We have producer on our board. We have educational leadership on our board. We have association leadership on our board. And our board does a really nice job of coming together. Listen, we're all born selfish. So when we come together, in this case, they want the best talent to come to their organizations, but they do a really nice job of pulling off their hat that they are representing on the board to say, is this just the best thing for us to do and for the reputation of AFA and the fulfillment of its mission? And I appreciate that. Some of that just comes with in the vetting process, making sure somebody really believes in the mission of the organization and isn't trying to get on the board because they want to have better access to the talent that we serve. And that's generally the case. But all that to be said, there could be times when people have their own selfish interests. And that's why, when I made the reference to not pursuing or joining a board because you have a bone to pick or you have something you want to solve, that's kind of where that's coming from, is make sure that you're engaged in service for something that you're passionate about and you believe in and you can be objective about, and not do it because of your own self-interest or that of your organization. And in the world that we live in today, like, that just happens a lot. And so, it just takes some critical thought, some due diligence to make sure that those are the situations that you're either trying to avoid or hopefully, if you're listening to this and you're considering service, avoid those things. Like, don't serve because of those reasons. Make sure that you're vetting the entities and make sure that their service is aligned with your desire to, again, provide strategic direction and oversight of the mission, support the staff and the organization's leadership, and have the best interests of all in mind, not just your own. And those are some of the more powerful boards that exist. So pretty sound advice. The final thing that I would add, and again, this is probably more true to the more not-for-profit public service, social service type entities, is ultimate fiduciary oversight. So just about every board at some level has fiduciary oversight as well. So ensuring that the entity will exist and it's well managed financially and it uses resources if it gets them from public interest for the intended purpose and all those sorts of things. That's another big one that we harp on with our board, is they may not serve on our finance committee, but they ultimately all are accountable to how we use and distribute our finances and, approve things like our budget and our audit and our tax return and that sort of thing.
That was great advice. I knew that you would give us great advice, but that far exceeded my expectations. So thank you for that. One thing that I do want to kind of hone in on is the importance of just being objective and separating your personal opinions from kind of what is best for either the members that you represent or the organization as a whole. And I know that you talked a little bit about this, but I do kind of want to go in a little bit deeper because thinking of myself, let's say, I want to serve on a board because I'm really passionate about the mission of the organization and of the people like me that I am serving, right? Whether that is, again, I'm in a district, and so it's the people local to me that I'm representing, or it's people who have operations like me, or again, that is going to depend based on the type of organization that you are serving. But at some point, I think that it can be really easy to then unknowingly start thinking about, well, what is best for me in this situation, and not necessarily what is best for, again, those people that you represent or the other people like you. And so really taking that step back and to be objective, knowing that sometimes you will be voting for things that may not benefit you personally, but is going to benefit everybody else. And there's a lot of importance in that.
Yeah. And just full disclosure, I have less experience with that because I haven't necessarily worked for entities that have had, elected positions or served, public office or those sorts of things. But here's what I would add, and I can have some perspective for, the corporations that are represented on our board. There's nothing wrong with, bringing your personal perspective and bias and, desires to board service. Where it goes a little bit too far is when you try to use power, influence, or politic for the things that you want. There's a difference. And so, the healthiest boards will get it all out on the table and will share divergent opinions of perspectives and even disclose that it's based on personal bias and interest. But then they come to, or they rally around what is best for the organization and the mission with which, we're here to achieve and accomplish. And that can be a little bit more challenging. I wouldn't say that that's all on the board member or the board structure in general. Some of that is up to the executive leadership. And what I mean by that is it could be, the staff leadership, the executive level, and how well they facilitate. In some cases, maybe even premeditate conversations like the ones that you're describing where there's self-interest involved. What I mean by premeditate is, prepare everybody for the conversation that's going to happen and know in advance that certain things might be sensitive. And the best executives probably prepare for the most difficult conversations so that when you get into the conversation, it's really not that hard at all because it's been seeded and prepared in the right way. That said, between staff leadership and board leadership, if there's not really open-minded, proactive, and conscientious leadership, then those contentious conversations are really challenging. All that to be said, you're never going to necessarily be able to predict that or maybe pick up on, the sophistication of the leadership when you're considering roles like this. But again, back to the idea of vetting, I would do your best to figure out what kind of leadership is involved in this organization and how will they tackle big, hairy, and conflicting type conversations so that you know what you're getting into. And again, back to matching alignment with you, it is about the work that the organization does, but I would also say make sure that your kind of personal style, desire for governance and leadership also aligns with the way that organization is run from a governance perspective. Do your best to try to figure out what that looks like and how you can understand it. Again, it's really hard because you can't be a fly on the wall for a director's meeting, all the time. But there are some entities like school boards, where you can go and you can be an active participant before you ever consider running. And I've considered that myself. I never went so far as to go to the meetings to consider, whether I wanted to run or not. But if there are opportunities like that, that would be a great way for you to understand what kind of leadership you're stepping into and how they run things and how they tackle difficult conversations. But ultimately, I don't believe there's anything wrong with bringing your own self-interest and desires and whatnot into service, as long as the governance itself is open and, accountable to what everybody has on the table. And you feel confident enough that it's not just a select few that are serving the self-interest and that it is really about the greater good. And then the final thing that I would say, just, and this could maybe be more of the political example, is knowing what interest you're representing can be a bit of a challenge, depending on the representation that you're going to be serving on behalf of. And all I really mean by that is like, if depends on how broad a geography or your service area you're talking about, my advice would be to figure out, if you step into this role, how are you going to best have a pulse on what those that are expecting you to serve in their interest want you to do for them? In politics, it can be fairly easy because people have, direct lines of communication. I don't know if that's always going to be the case in some of the local or state districts and that sort of thing, but how will you have a pulse on those that you're serving? I would hope you have a desire to have a pulse on those that you're serving, but if you don't have that easily accessible, what are you going to do to get it to ensure that you're serving on behalf of those that are expecting you to serve for them? And in some cases, that may take some intention, some outreach, some ability and desire to listen to form, different perspectives. But again, every organization is a little bit different, but those are just a few things that make me react to what you were curious about.
Oh, I think that is such great advice, especially the point that you bring up about making sure to attend those meetings that you are curious of. If you were going to serve on that board, attending the meetings first to really kind of get a pulse of the board, that is fabulous advice, especially if you maybe have questions of why a board is doing something. Like, let's say you're a member of the organization and you have questions as to why are we making these types of decisions or whatever it may be. Start showing up at the meetings. That is a very great way to really understand the full picture, even more than just the meeting minutes can provide you. And I also love what you mentioned about really having a plan for how are you going to understand what your constituents want and need and how you can reflect that back in your service. Really having that open line of communication and being prepared for, maybe difficult conversations. None of us want to have those, but I think that if you can really have that, open office hours or whatever that looks like for you, again, is really important, because open line of communication is really, really key to, one, growing yourself as a person and as a better leader, but also really understanding how you can best represent those who you are serving.
Yeah. And one final add on to that, I'm going to guess people listening to this podcast probably have a desire to learn different perspectives and challenge their own and maybe hear and learn new things. And so I think we're sort of preaching to the choir here. The dangerous possibility is that those that aren't wired like us are the ones in these service roles. They're closed-minded. They're not interested in other people's perspectives. They're not going to make informed decisions. They're not interested in, what other constituencies believe. They have their own beliefs and they're going to serve based on those and not be more open-minded. And that can certainly be dangerous. And so, again, I think we're sort of preaching to the choir. I think all we're just trying to do is encourage those that are interested in service to think about how you'll come to those conversations with a broader perspective, be even more open-minded to stuff that maybe you can't comprehend or understand or appreciate. And there's real growth that comes with that. And then serve, to the best of your ability for those that you're there to serve. And again, can be really frustrating, can be some great life skills, and can be extremely fulfilling if done right.
Oh, amen to that. Okay, well, I think that this gets us to our rapid fire round. So I have an exciting thing to share with our listeners. So we always do a rapid fire round. For the last 2 years, we've had the exact same questions. We switched those up. So Mark, you are the first person who is going to start answering this new set of rapid fire round questions. Get excited, get nervous. I don't know what to tell you, how to
All
preface you,
above.
but here we go. Okay. What do you hope people remember most about you?
That I cared for the greater good, the idea of serving community and leaving the world a better place because of the way I served.
Ooh, I like that. Okay. What is one non-negotiable in your life?
Being a good human. And I mean, just like, don't be a jerk.
It's really not that difficult to be a good human, but somehow it seems to be difficult.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
Okay. If you were a professional athlete, we didn't ever share this with the group, but you played college football, correct?
I did. Yep. I did football and track in college. Never the professional, but I think I know where you're going.
Let's say you made it to the NFL. What would your walkout song be?
The irony is we have had a lot of conversation internally about this topic, and I've come up with a list, and it's really hard because something else you need to know about me is I also played the drums in a band in college.
I was just going to say, wait a minute. I also read that you were a drummer. I see where this conversation is going.
So I gravitate towards percussion if we're connecting the dots. And so I probably listen to mostly country now, but there was a day it was more rap and hip hop. And then there was a day when it was more rock, which is more what our band was. But I always come back to beats and percussion. So a couple interesting ones. Song number 2 by Blur, because it jumps right in and there's it gets to the point, which I think is what you need in a good walk-up song. And it needs to get to the hook or the thing that catches you. And this may be a little bit more controversial for people that do listen to rock, because Nickelback is the band and they can be kind of controversial for some people in the Follow You Home. So if you Google it, you'll see why I like it. It's very percussion heavy at the very beginning. So those would probably be the first 2 that come to mind, but I'm still developing the list. So if you've got good ones, send them my way.
I will say, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't know why Nickelback gets all the flack that they do, because I actually really enjoy Nickelback. I'm not too proud to admit that. I think that they get a lot of unnecessary negative attention.
Yeah, there's an interesting documentary I think it's on Netflix on them, if you're ever curious. Canadian rock band, trying to explain why they did get so much flack. But anyways, good to hear you. But yeah, Google that one. You'll know why I like it as a former drummer.
Okay. What is the smartest thing that somebody has ever told you?
This is the one I probably share the most often. So, you often hear live life with no regrets. My dad told me one time, and this may not be verbatim, but this is the way I remember it, is you will always have regrets in life. Figure out how to live with conviction for the choices that you make, or choose your own words about it. But essentially, if faced with a difficult decision, you're going to choose one of 2 paths. There will be a point in time when regrets will naturally start to creep up. It doesn't go as well as you thought, or you start to sort of self-doubt. Be as convicted as possible in the decision you made so that you can stuff those doubts back down. That's just a different way of trying to live a life with no regrets, because I don't think it's actually possible as a human to literally never question or say what if. And so that's probably the thing that I've tried to live by the most. And I've shared with a number of young people throughout the years who I could tell have questioned the path that they chose over something else they could have done. It may not help them in that current moment, but hopefully it will help them in the future. So yeah, that's probably one of the things that I've gravitated towards the most.
Okay, final question for you. Favorite things. Do you have a favorite podcast, book, program, mentor, like maybe a service that has changed your life, something that you just wish that more people knew about? Now's the time to share it.
So I'll put it in a different category. I'll share 2 examples. One would be author, and not book, but author.
Okay.
I'm a big Lencioni fan. Patrick Lencioni wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is what I got turned on to. I think it would be a must read for everyone, but I would recommend a whole lineup of books. That one, The Ideal Team Player, and it used to be called The 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. They've renamed it to The Truth About Employee Engagement. Those would be like my top 3 of his. Easy, quick read, fable-based, simple concepts, easy, actionable, if you really want to commit to those types of things. So it's all around team leadership, ideal team players, and how to have engaged team members. Kind of just for, again, you can hopefully tell I try to be a fairly optimistic person. The most recent podcast that I'll pop on just to try to escape would be A Bit of Optimism by Simon Sinek. I just love the thought-provoking, optimistic tone of that podcast whenever I'm just looking for a change of pace. So those would be the 2 things I gravitate back to Lencioni, and then if I need a change of pace or some optimism, I'll jump over to Sinek's podcast. And shameless plug, Cultivating Leaders podcast is one that AFA is putting on. So if you we're trying to get kind of real, raw, authentic conversations with leadership in all sorts of aspects. And Jesse, we hope to have you on soon. But we've got a number of them up if you go to our website now, and there's some pretty interesting things that I've already learned from some of the ones that are featured on our podcast. So yeah, if you're interested in different perspectives on cultivating leadership, I would recommend that. Shameless plug for AFA.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I will make sure that we link that and then the author and that other podcast as well. Mark, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. I hope that for those of you who are listening, I hope that we have encouraged you to go serve in some way or to even just contemplate serving and how you could serve and what that would look like for you. Because again, it's going to look different for everybody. Everybody's going to have different experiences in doing so, but it is absolutely vital to the future of our industry, to our rural communities, to basically everything that touches us and that we touch. So I hope that this just kind of helps you navigate that, because I know that all of us at some point in our lives are probably going to be asked to serve. And so now you've thought about it versus just straight up saying no. So thank you again for today's episode, Mark. For those of you who are listening, you guys know we will be back here next week with another episode of Leaders of the West. Until then, go crush it. We are so proud of you. And thank you guys for being here. So we'll see you next week.
If you loved this episode, do us a favor and share it with someone else who might find just as much value in it as you did. We're on a mission to continue to grow and strengthen the future of agriculture and Western industries, and you spreading the word helps us make more of a positive impact. It also makes a big difference when you take a minute to go rate and review the show. We can't thank you enough for listening, for sharing, and for loving Ag and Western as much as we do. We'll see you back here for our next episode.